deal with, and you'll become the genius of your class. You know, people will really. I mean, I know two fellows who are professors of psychiatry. That's what they did in medical school, right? They actually skipped class and read Aquinas instead in medical school, and then eventually they got invited to be professors. One here at Harvard, and one at UC Riverside in psychiatry. And I think it was because they were able to bring together both their knowledge of their discipline, the contemporary movements in their discipline, within the context of this deeper formation, this deeper culture they got for reading Aquinas. I also think there's a great value in reading catechisms and papal encyclicals, especially going back to the 19th century. The Catechism of the Council, the current catechism is great. The Catechism of the Council of Trent is also excellent. And there's also a commentary. There's also a commentary on the Catechism of the Council of Trent written by Spirago, S-P-I-R-A-G-O. And that's very helpful because he does a great job, I think, of summarizing the fathers of the church. So the Catechism of the Council of Trent is just like, this is what we teach. Spirago does a great job of summarizing like what the fathers are giving us, how they're behind a lot of what's going on here. And the more Etienne Gilson made this point. And Etienne Gilson he was here at Harvard in the 1930s. And he was offered a tenure position because he was such a gentleman. But Gilson, whenever he would speak with Catholics, he would say, you have a great resource in the catechism. Right? You don't realize what a great resource you have in these catechisms that are put together. Because there is ultimately a unity between faith and reason. And again, you may not be able to convince everybody of that. And you don't read these things just to kind of pound people over the head with them. But reading them and imbibing them, it gives you a kind of healthy, quiet, sometimes it's a quiet confidence, but it's a very healthy confidence. I think Elizabeth Anscombe had that. She was kind of, I think it led her to have real intellectual fortitude, right? That led her to do things like if I don't think we should give Truman the degree, I'm not going to protest it, even if nobody goes along with it. I think also reading these catechisms, it gives you a good, so I think sometimes we fail to appreciate the genuine diversity, and I'm not talking about justifying heresy or anything like that, but I think actually knowing the catechisms well, it gives you a great appreciation of like what to stand on, and then also where there is an authentic pluralism and diversity, right? And I think part of what happened in Catholic intellectual circles from '92 to the present, especially in the United States, is that in the interest of forming a political movement, there wasn't great appreciation for genuine diversity, or genuine pluralism, right? And maybe part of that came from not knowing so well the tradition. And on that note, I will say, I've given you my jump shot. That's it. Now I'm open for questions. Yes.
So you said that St. JP2 was really disappointed by the Americans that didn't help him create this project of creating a new kind of magisterium. And that because of that, you mentioned that American intellectual thought hasn't quite recovered yet in Rome.
Yeah.
But so does that mean then that everyone in Rome knew that the Americans were disappointed? Jean Paul II?
So the question is, just to summarize your question, right? Did everyone in Rome really know? Were they aware that the Americans had disappointed John Paul II? Yes. The answer is yes. No, Rome, you gotta understand, Rome, the Vatican is a country club. Well, but I mean that I don't mean that in a disrespectful sense, but I mean that in the sense that, look, in a country club, you at least know everybody who knows everybody. You at least know someone who knows someone. It's actually very small. All of the If you take all of the students that are on pontifical universities in Rome, and you add them up, you'll get to around 24,000. Right? So that's not just people working in the Vatican. That's the Vatican plus all the universities in Rome that the Vatican oversees, which is the Gregorian, Santa Croce, the Anselmian, the Angelicum, and the Lateran. 24. In other words, it's Harvard University. Okay. So can word get around in Rome that the Pope is disappointed without him having to write anything down? Absolutely. Absolutely. And just from a kind of sociological standpoint, just as at a country club, fama volat, in Rome. Word travels quickly. And also, I think it's also true that Rome is also very much still an aristocracy and a monarchy. Right? And so the politics of Rome are very much the politics of the monarchical court. And if you know that, you can read a lot of things by gestures. Just to give you an example, Pope Francis is very good about this. How you allow yourself to be photographed as Pope. If the Pope allows himself to be photographed just standing with someone shaking his hand, that's a sign of a certain distance. If the Pope turns around and allows himself to be photographed side by side, that's a sign of a certain friendship. If he turns around and is side by side and he smiles, that's even better, right? So and all of this is protocol of the court. It's all protocol of the court. So it's not just a country club in the American sense of the term, yes, but you can read these things. Hesburgh, just going back to the 1960s. Hesburgh had an open door to Paul VI until 1968. After 1968, when Hesburgh failed to support Humanae Vitae publicly, that door was shut. Hesburgh was able to bring John Rockefeller into Paul VI's office so that John Rockefeller could offer to write Humanae Vitae. Right? He had that level of confidence with Paul VI. And after 1969, he didn't have that confidence. And the president of Notre Dame during the pontificate of John Paul II could not get an audience with the Pope. Why? Because Notre Dame had declared its independence from the church, opposed the church publicly, in a public and aggressive way, in various things that the church, even Paul VI, thought was important. And so there was a response in the protocols. And the Catholics who had access to the Pope before 2002, between, let's say, 1984 and 2002, they lost that easy access after 2002. Yeah, so there's all sorts of stuff. Obviously these are subtle signs, but they're present. Do you have a follow-up?
It's something completely different.
Okay. Yes.
What's an example of something that we need to take a principled stand on today that might be ingrained in politics that perhaps we could be, let's just say pro-traditional family people, let's say we're allied with, X group.
Well,
what are some things that we need to be wary about and be like Anscombe and stick to our principles in order to make progress?
Well, so, I think the infanticide is one area, obviously. I would say again, how you do this, I think that following the magisterium of the church, right, if you just take the sins that cry out to heaven for vengeance, in ways that you could publicly develop sociological or political thought or legislation that would reflect respect for these areas would be another way. Right? And there could be, another thing I think would be to look for to look for potential. I know that in some cities there are Catholics out there who are looking for potential allies in areas of legislation, economics, politics, for rebuilding cities in the Midwest or the Mountain West, where they're trying to form coalitions that, let's say, cut across what you might think would otherwise just be kind of strictly divided political lines. So I think I guess I would say there's lots of opportunities at the local level. And the other thing I would also say, I think I said this in the talk, that to try to develop to try to flesh out a little bit more, this would be more for an intellectual, like a political philosopher or someone in political science or sociology, right? To try to develop somewhat of a fleshed out version, a kind of fleshed out understanding of the common good in our circumstances. How, given the circumstances we're in, we can start to take steps towards achieving the common good. First of all, to argue for it, and then to argue what its requirements might be in our circumstances, which would probably cut across the divides that, first of all, a genuine understanding of the common good is going to be difficult to articulate in our time. Because you're going to have to, intellectually, you'd have to make all sorts of distinctions from misappropriations of the term. Right? But then also to start to flesh out what might be some political consequences. Yes?
Jeff, I was wondering if you could say a little bit about Nagasaki and the history of Nagasaki, especially its, I don't know how much students know about this.
Yeah.
It might be useful, a little bit of a history of the Rome of the East idea.
Yeah.
That maybe gets us back to the article and
Right. Right, so part of the question is, could we say something more about the history of Nagasaki and how it was like the Rome of the East? So I'm not as well versed in that, other than I just know that Nagasaki was one of the centers of Catholicism in Japan. Right, that as far as Japan goes, a large section of the population was Catholic, and I don't know much of the history of Nagasaki other than that. And I also don't know. I know that in some of these debates there are questions asked: was it targeted because it was Catholic, because there was this Catholic population there? But I've never gone into that debate so much. But I know that that's a question out there on why was Nagasaki bombed rather than some other city in Japan, because it wasn't really a military target at all.
It seems, I was interested, Bolsheviks entered the war August 8th, Nagasaki bombed August 9th.
Yeah.
There was some wheeling or dealing going on maybe, or that had to do with the, post rebuilding of Japan post World War II, because Kyoto is preserved, right?
Right.
And,
Right. Yeah, so the comment there is, it's interesting that Nagasaki was, the war was declared by the Bolsheviks on August 8th. Nagasaki's bombed on August 9th. Kyoto was preserved, which is kind of a cultural capital still in Japan. And was there any kind of shenanigans going on between the great powers as far as post-war rebuilding of Japan? And yeah, I don't know. I'm aware of that problem, but I've never looked into it. I don't know if anybody else here has, but I haven't looked into it. That'd be a great research topic, I think. You could do it. The way I think you would do it is I remember when I was in the 1990 or so, I was told that by 2010 or so, you start to get a lot of the documentation coming out on the First World War. Notes that were going back and forth between the leaders, so you can understand the diplomacy. So I would imagine in the next 15 or 20 years, like for example, this second article that I put up here, these are researchers that got access to the notes that were going back and forth between the Japanese generals in August of 1945. Right, so that kind of evidence is coming out now. So you could look into this by trying to find out, well, do we have notes, or do we have any kind of eyewitness accounts of what kind of jockeying was going on, or what kind of diplomacy was going on between Stalin and Truman, Chamberlain. Maybe sometimes you can even find this stuff out by looking at independent nations, but that are like reliable observers. So, for example, in 19th century Europe, the Netherlands and what becomes Belgium become reliable observers for what's going on in diplomacy in Europe in the 19th century, because they're somewhat neutral in a lot of these. And so a lot of times they're able to be brokers, and everybody kind of says the truth to them, what they're really up to, right? So you could, I think, start to get at this question by looking at documents among the foreign policy experts and whatnot, who were around Roosevelt and Truman, and also around British leadership and Japanese leadership. And that would be possible to do as a research project, I think, at this point. Yes?
I'm curious, so Anscombe protested Truman receiving the award because of the hundreds of thousands of lives, innocent lives. Would Anscombe have protested Truman getting the award if the U.S. gave notice to the cities and all the innocent people were able to leave, but subsequently hundreds of thousands of people were without housing and water and perished anyhow? Would Anscombe have protested the award if it was only 50 people? So I'm just curious the degrees of at what point it's acceptable or
Yeah. So the question is like, would Anscombe have protested the award of granting the degree if, let's say, the civilians were given notice so they could evacuate the city, but then subsequently it caused famine? Or would Anscombe have still protested if, let's say, only 50 civilians were killed in the bombing? And I think that I think she understood part of just war use in bello, right? Is that if you are going to bomb a military target, that you should give notice to the civilians so that they can escape. Right? So that if you're in a war and you genuinely have to bomb the city for that reason. And I think she even says, if it were that question, I would then consider, maybe he merited still this degree, this award, right? I think on the question of famine, I would almost defer to an Anscombe scholar to answer that question, but my gut reaction would be she would be against it. But I would defer my opinion to someone who knows her thought better than mine. Only because I think she might think that that's a foreseeable consequence and that you are affecting innocent civilians' lives. I also know that, and then finally, if it were 50, I think she would still oppose if it were 50. And if it were 10, she would still oppose. Because why? You can't take innocent life, even if it's one. Right? Now, I do know that in the case of Germany, there was a plan actually to deal with the Germans that was much harsher than the Marshall Plan. And in the opening months towards the end of the war, that plan was kind of confected during the presidency of Roosevelt under the guidance of a guy named Morgenthau. And I think it was a Chicago professor. But that plan was brutal. And that plan imposed a policy on Germany that actually did cause famine. And it was so brutal. It was so brutal that the German hierarchy told the faithful, we're in a Robin Hood situation. Like, you can steal to get food. Because why? Because this policy is causing famine. So Cardinal Frings of Cologne gave these homilies, basically telling Germans, anywhere you can get food, take it, because we're in famine. And actually that plan was so brutal, and Marshall, we all know the Marshall Plan, we all have at least heard that, I think, in our high school textbooks. Marshall actually intervened in the Truman administration and said, this is so brutal. This Morgenthau plan was so brutal. We gotta do something different. And then really what got implemented then was the Marshall Plan over the next 20 years. So in that, what's interesting is in that case, right, the Truman administration was able to see that policies are something that leads to famine. That we should not do. right? There is something despicable about that. And it's gone too far in what justice will allow. By the way, something just came to my mind in what you just said. And it's just that, I guess it's because it brought up the thing of justice. I also think that it's important that this comes up a lot now in this country. You see it now in the magisterium, like that we were discussing it earlier, right? And this was a big debate that began among Catholics in the magisterium in the 19th century. For every level of social organization, there's certain requirements of justice. And part of the political debate is what are the rights and responsibilities that are appropriate for that level of political organization. So in the 19th century, the magisterium of the church was more than happy to say, look, you got family, right? You got family, we have city. In the United States, you have a state, you have a nation. And part of the whole development of what's called subsidiarity and solidarity was trying to develop what is the kind of justice that applies given this network of relationships. And it's sloppy. And sometimes what's sloppy is, well, how does the family and the city and the state and the nation, how do they all relate to one another? But the church was more than willing to say in the 19th century, well, we have this thing now called the nation. And we can't reject it as an entity. And we can say that there are certain requirements of justice that come out of it, certain obligations that citizens owe to it, and certain things that it should look for, that it should take care of in the nation. I think the Germans, especially in the 19th century, did a wonderful job. Actually, a lot of Catholic social teaching comes out of German theology, who were thinking about what is the right amount of political and economic guidance that the state should give. It's neither, and the Germans were thinking it's neither too capitalist nor too communist. It's not socialist either. Right, but what is it? And actually, many of these Germans who did that, they were the advisors behind the social encyclicals from the 1870s until the 1960s. Right? But then also, in the 19th century, the magisterium also began this thinking about, and they're still doing this now, but it doesn't play well in the United States, right? Or it gets confused, and like, how do you deal with it? What are the appropriate requirements of justice, the appropriate obligations, rights, duties in the international order, right? That there is, and again, we're not talking here about the New World Order. I mean, in other words, a lot of times this gets translated into our country as, the New World Order, or we're going to be wearing microchips on our, on our wrists or something. We're not talking about our one world government. Right? We're not talking about that. But I think what the Vatican is saying is, if there is an international community, then there's going to be some relationships with justice that are going to be part of the international community. And that might be built also on regional communities, like North America, or the Americas, or Europe and Asia. I mean, there could be, the church is more than, going back to the Middle Ages, the church is more than happy to recognize you can build different levels of you can have different levels of political organization, and there can be different requirements of justice at each level of political organization. So, it's sloppy, and it's not easy to understand all these things, but that's, I think, another area that the church, I think in Rome, they're praying for the rise of intellectual champions, right, who are willing to kind of take on some of these tasks. So, then there was a question over here, yeah. Oh, sorry, you were first.
Yeah.
Jorge was first.
So with that just war theory, is there any moral ground for unconditional surrender? Because pamphlet from Anscombe and the article, there's a sort of sense that the insistence for unconditional surrender, from which through like the perception of the necessity of the law and everything, that it was ill-founded.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is there room in Anscombe for unconditional surrender? I think that I would be hard pressed to come up with, I'm sure we could do it, but I think there is no room for unconditional surrender in the context of just war theory. Because you want to get to peace, not at any cost, but you want to get a negotiated peace is going to be much better than a peace which can very easily descend into vengeance. And it seems like an unconditional surrender, you're always going to be descending into a kind of unjust peace, where you're going to be going for vengeance rather than a reestablishment of peace. Question?
Yeah, this is inquiring into one of your last points. You said there's something in building, cultural coalitions. Many Catholics may have lost sight of what is a genuine pluralism or a genuine diversity. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so the question is, in building political coalitions, some Catholic intellectuals might have lost a appreciation of genuine diversity. So I would say you can see this happening. You can see this happening both by the 70s and 80s. You can see this happening in certain ways, both on the Catholic left in the United States and on the Catholic right. Right? In the Democratic Party, there becomes a kind of intolerance for any Democratic Catholic politician who's pro-life. Which is actually a genuine, honest to goodness, respectable position. To the point where right now, last summer there's 2 Catholic pro-life congressmen left. Lipinski outside of Chicago, whose own party ran against him in the primary last year. And then there's one in Texas, in one of the border towns, in Brownsville, Texas. Henry Cuello. And so I think then I think what happened, so that would be an example on the left, which is an obvious one, right? I think within what happened, especially in the 1990s, is that there was a kind of there was an insistence that if you were part of this Catholic Republican coalition, that you had to sign on to free market capitalism, right? And you had to sign on to aggressive American foreign policy. And if you didn't sign on to those two planks, you were no longer allowed in polite conversation. Right? So in other words, those are 2 areas where I think in economics there's a good number of there's a possibility of a good number of possible healthy positions that are neither socialist nor communist nor straight up free market capitalism. They could be acceptable in a political coalition. I think also you could find an acceptable range, again, and I don't think this was the case in the 90s. You can have an acceptable range of positions on, I think there was a kind of we either have to say nothing about aggressive American foreign policy or support it. And if you're not willing to do those 2 things, again, you're not allowed to polite company. And so I think those 2 things need to be broken. Yes?
Thank you, Father Jeff, for your talk. One thing that we were talking about earlier, I think it was mentioned in an earlier talk, was we quoted Solzhenitsyn in his speech here at Harvard. I think it was with Dr. Wicks. Oh, you mentioned that he said that the modern West was afraid to embrace courage.
He said, from the point of view of an outsider, one of the most conspicuous features of the modern West was the lack of courage.
Lack of courage, right. Thank you. And so I'm just thinking with what you were mentioning at the end of your talk with Anscombe's formation, would you suggest that it was the catechism that gave her the courage to declare her opposition towards Truman? We're speaking of her.
So the question is, was it the catechism that gave her the courage to offer her opposition ultimately towards Truman? My answer would be, I don't think she thought that she had to go that far. I mean, clearly, so what do I mean by that? I mean, clearly the catechism, even the catechism of the Council of Trent or the church teaching at the time, it would be very clear, you can't take the life of the innocent. Right, that's murder. But I think her understanding of, I think she thought that still as of 1956, right, that she could argue for this based on the tradition of moral philosophy using reason. Right? That she could get people to accept this based on the use of reason. And then I think she thought that if you're not willing, I think she says it in the essay, right? That to not accept this is a sign you're falling into barbarism.
So unfortunately we're out of time now, but
Okay.
thank you for following.
You're welcome.